Hey Sam, it's so good to have you on our podcast today.
It's absolutely lovely to be here. And you know what I really appreciated, Evelyn, was that we started with this little kind of moment of breathing together and slowing down and connecting that way. I think that's so important in life.
Yeah, and we so rarely get to do this, and I especially think because we are both very into working with our bodies and bringing this embodied presence into the
Mhm.
conversations and into our work, it's even more important that we start with like in the moment, really getting into the body, getting really into the present moment and starting from that point instead of like rushing into conversations after like trying to figure out some tech issues. So yeah, thank you also for that impulse to really connect.
That's my pleasure. And, I feel for some of my clients because often they're coming from one Zoom to the next Zoom and then into the coaching call. And I often begin that way because I don't think we're wired as humans to be so online and so connected in that way without breaks. I think we need these little micro breaks in our day, just so that we can come back to ourselves and really tune into what's happening in our systems so we can go back out resourced and ready to attack the day with vitality and energy.
And I think also because it's like sometimes believed that it takes like a lot of time, like to do a meditation or to make consciously space for these kind of practices. It's always surprising how even like little moments of like 1 or 2 minutes of conscious breathing, of just like bringing your attention into your body is so effective. And this can be done anywhere, like at the bus stop, in between meetings, on the bathroom. And like it's really impressive to see what the effect on the body and the nervous system is if we integrate these kind of practices more regularly into our daily routines. Yes.
It totally is. And I think this idea of mindfulness is becoming more and more kind of prevalent for people. I think we're all waking up to the fact that we're living in a very high paced world and that we definitely need to take these moments for ourselves because actually no one's going to give them to us. So we have to choose that. But of course, what we're fighting against often is our phones and, our distractions and, that WhatsApp message that you just have to read right now. And the numb scrolling and then AI right now, which is obviously a wonderful thing, but it's another thing that's really pulling us and taking our attention and taking our life force and energy towards it. And as we know, where attention goes, energy flows. And so I think there's this conscious need right now to ask ourselves, well, where am I placing my attention? Where am I directing my energy towards? Is it coming from intentionality or is it coming from this kind of scattered place of being pulled left, right, and center? And I say that not as some kind of smug guru who knows how to constantly be, in the present and totally intentional, because I don't. But I do try to practice that. And, as they say, practice makes perfect, although I don't totally believe in perfection. But, the more you do it, the more I think when you find yourself coming out of that place, you can actually come back in. And that's what I'm finding. I catch myself earlier and then I can come back and slow back down. Yesterday was an example. I had so many creative project loose ends and my creative mind was so busy in a kind of positive way, wanting to tie them all up and, finally having the space to do all of them. And you can hear from the words, all of them. I was never going to do all of them in one day. And so I got myself to quite a frustrated place of like, oh my gosh, but I'm never going to finish that now. And I really wanted to. And I suddenly thought, what are you doing? And I closed my eyes and I did a little bit like we did at the beginning of our session today. I took some breaths and I started to let go. I can even, hear my voice slow down as I tell you about this. And I started to open up my senses. I was in the garden and I could suddenly, feel the warmth of the sun and I could hear the birds in the trees, which I so love at this time of year. And I realized, wow, I was momentarily lost in busyness and in, being pulled around. And yeah, I can come back. And from the moment I took that choice to just have a little mindful moment and take stock, my emotional battery recharged. And I was able to go into the rest of my day with much more joy, actually, and much more groundedness. And also with a sort of realism, like, we only have a day, 24 hours. We cannot do everything in that day. And, life is here to be experienced. Our senses are there to be opened and accessed. That brings us that sense of aliveness and, gratitude and contentment in our lives. And so, yeah, for me, this topic is super important because I really feel it's such a gift that we have to be alive in a beautiful, imperfect human body. And yeah, to honor that is to actually notice the little things that are happening around us and in us, and not to be, completely pulled away and distracted by details and expectations.
Yeah, I'm completely with you on that train. And it's really impressive also to notice, like, since you started talking about this slowing down and tuning into your senses, like the space that we're in together right now really shifted for me. Like it all became way more um rich and
Mm,
like soft also in a
yeah.
sense, and also more gentle, like
Mm,
more alive. So these are like the attributes that are coming to mind right now. Um, but I totally agree that it's like also in my daily practice, like it happened so often, even for me yesterday when I came back and I had a similar experience with like also having different projects and new projects coming in, and I got really excited. And then I had this like massive to-do list, and I was almost getting into this mode of like, oh my God, I need to do
yeah.
it all. I need to get it all done. And I think what you mentioned is so important, like in this moment, realizing, hey, I also do have another choice, and I can take these little moments to step back and breathe and arrive in this moment, and it will not make me less productive. It will not make me do less or accomplish less, but actually quite the opposite.
Mm,
Because if I experience myself as being present and being in this centered and open space, usually the things that I do, I'm able to do them in a way more effective way
mm,
to a certain degree, because I'm more like clear on what the priority is, and I'm also more compassionate with myself, with like, this is the time that I'm focusing now, and this is the time where I'm taking a break, and then usually it gets just done in a way more efficient way. So yeah.
I think that's key what you've just said there, because, we can whip ourselves into productivity. And, every now and again, I guess a tiny bit of that might even be needed. But as you're speaking to, usually when we do the whipping and the pushing and the forcing, what we create or produce or make happen is just not coming from a good place energetically in us. And so it doesn't necessarily reward us and it doesn't feel fulfilling. And I do believe that has an impact on how it's received by whoever we're intending it for. So the energy that we put into something is felt. Even if we don't think it can be seen and we think we've done the job, but even if it's rushed, it can be felt. We can be felt to the extent where, the energy that we are is felt even before the words that we say. And I'm a words person, so I get so fixated on words.
Mhm.
And yet, what I know is, of course, sometimes my words have an intrigue or a power, not always, sometimes. And yet, really what people are taking away from their interactions with me is how I'm making them feel, how they feel I am, conveying my energy towards them. And so, again, that's another place to get curious and conscious about what energy am I choosing to bring in here? What energy am I choosing to do my to do list with? What energy am I choosing to bring into my own life, my own precious sacred life? Because this is a gift, as I said before. And I think from a personal experience, I had multiple losses in my life. One was losing my father back in 2015, which was just so devastating. He was my hero. And, it's kind of classic, but what losing my father taught me was to really fully embrace life, to honor it, to worship life, to really value and see and live the sacredness of it in relationships. Those people that are in our lives, we're so fortunate to have them. And so, yeah, there's for me this like daily wish to just be really aware of how lucky I am and to actually mindfully interact with the experiences and people that I'm having encounters with on the day to day.
Mhm. Hey, I didn't know that we have so much in common. Like, I already knew that we had, like, some, like, overlaps in terms of our passions, but it's really interesting because for me, my dad passed away 2 years ago, and for me, it was also a quite intense realization. I mean, he had been sick and he left life pretty early, but it was kind of because of the ripple effects of overworking and of like constantly, chasing these to-dos and taking on so much ownership and responsibility for things that weren't really his responsibility. And I think what it also taught me, like being so close to him and going through this period of grief, is like it opened me up in a different
Mm,
way. It opened up my heart. It was like obviously one of the most painful experiences to go through this grief, but ultimately I think it's also about allowing these cycles of life, allowing these emotions to be there and to be felt, that goes in both ways. It goes into the dark side of grief, but then also connects us ultimately more deeply to love. And then, I mean, I guess what I'm speaking to, like this experience of just life becomes so much more broad, and juicy.
mm,
um, if we are opening up to this full experience of what it's like to be living through all these different moments that are part of the human experience, that are part
mm,
of being alive. And it doesn't matter um, in what way these experiences come, but usually grief, for example, is one of the experiences that every human being goes through at one point in their life. Um, I would also actually be really curious because in our previous conversation, you were also speaking a little bit about how your transition went from. And that's also why I decided to call this podcast episode from Boardroom to Bodywork, because I remember you had some experience in the corporate and then decided to move more into becoming a coach and like coaching people more coming back into their bodies. And I would be really curious, like, if you could take us a little bit into your journey on how that transitioned went and what inspired you along this
Yeah.
way.
Firstly, I just want to say I'm so sorry for your loss. So going back to the previous conversation, it touched my heart that you shared that, and I can really relate to that cracking it open that happens. You're so wide open when you lose somebody that you love so dearly, and it's a big thing to go through. And I think we're navigating that. It's a big journey, and it has twists and turns and an enormous amount also of beauty. When we see, like you say, the other side of the coin, I do believe that grief and pleasure almost are two sides of the same coin. All of that loss, when we actually let it happen, leaves this kind of openness that allows also beauty and newness to come in. And it's such a dance. So, yeah, thank you for speaking to that. Yeah, so my journey, well, gosh, where to start? I guess it starts over here in Switzerland. I used to be a teacher, and I was kind of going through a phase in my life where I felt like I had to kind of keep under the radar, do my thing, go through the motions. And I wasn't contented. I had some lovely things in my life, but it felt like something was missing. It felt like, oh, there's this maybe 75% of me that's actually not getting to be expressed in my life through my work, through who I am. And so I had this kind of feeling of frustration and limitation and almost, I guess, disconnection from my truest essence. And then a series of events happened. But in amidst these events happening, I was in the school holidays one year and I was sat in the garden feeling exhausted, thinking, oh my gosh, I really want to do something that makes me feel energized and that, is using that whole of me, not just my mind and, just everything. And so I was like flicking through a magazine, I think it was Psychology's magazine. And then I saw this advertisement for life coaching. And I'd always had this a bit on my radar. And I thought, you know what? I'd quite like to look into that. And I spoke to my partner about it. And he said, Sam, do your research. Like, if you're going to do this, go to a good coaching school, go to the best one, get the best training. And so fast forward, and I ended up speaking to a colleague of his whose friend actually was a coactive coach, and I trained as a coactive coach. And immediately, when I was in the very first training, I sat there and it was like, wow, this is where I'm meant to be. This is who I am. This is where a new life starts for me because I know what I can bring into this field. I know I can use my powerful intuition, my seeing of people, my innate empathy, my ability to sense things that are said but not said. And so I felt this kind of like glittery, I guess, excitement of how I could, step into the world of coaching and self-development with people because I'd been on my own self-development journey since the age of 18, following a series of really traumatic events in my life. So I wasn't new to, personal development. I wasn't new to any of that. And I knew I had a lot to offer because I was well resourced and also, had experienced quite a few things that would be able to help people. So, yes, so I trained as a coach, loved it. And in that time, I also lost my father, which was obviously a really kind of pivotal moment in my life. And so, as I was training as a coach, I also kind of reawakened my creativity and I started to write poetry. I remember coming back from my father's funeral to Switzerland. And I was still working as a teacher at the time. And I used to walk 50 minutes to work. And on the way, after the funeral, it was this cold January morning. And I felt just overwhelmed by emotion, grief, sadness, anxiety, despair, fear, all of those things you just really don't want to feel. And they were all there. And I'm like, oh gosh, what do I do with this? How am I going to get up and teach teenagers all day long when I am carrying all of this stuff in my body and my system? And in that moment, I received a message. And the message was, write it down. And so I'm like, okay, well, I've got nothing else to lose here. I feel absolutely awful. So I get out my phone and I start to kind of write into my phone. And it becomes these poems. And I'm like, really? And I'd always liked words. And I had written the occasional poem when I was younger, but this was like just flowing. And so, yeah, the first step, honestly, was actually letting the emotion in coaching. We talk about, emotions, energy in motion. So the energy of the grief, of the pain, of the fear to just come out of me onto, I'm going to say the page, it was the screen actually, but in words. And so my journey with the coaching was that I had a very kind of sympathetic, kind audience to my poetry at the time, my fellow trainee coaches. And so I began sharing these poems very kind of innocently, really, and wanting to be held because I was going through such a painful time. But quickly I realized that they were having quite an impact and that people were saying, you ought to do something with that. This is, this really resonated with me. And so creativity just kind of exploded. And so energetically, and even as I speak to this, I feel kind of like chills on my arms and stuff. Something got spinning and growing again in me. and flowing again. You know, the creativity actually enabled me to start to become less numb, disconnected, under the radar, and more expressed in myself. So actually, the grief in some ways was a vehicle for that first step when I was transitioning. And yeah, there were some other really difficult things that I went through during that time. One of them was a redundancy, a very painful redundancy, and some other losses, you know. And I start to think, my gosh, can I lose anything else right now? This is super tough. And so I took a decision. And my decision was, right, I am going to sign up to do the inner leadership journey with the Coaches Training Institute, the Coactive Training Institute now. And I trusted the organization. I had friends that had been through the process. And I thought, this is my time. You know, I've gone through so much loss. I feel like I'm really having to reinvent myself here. And I need a space to do that in. And so, you know, the creativity was helping. And this just like took things onto a whole different level, Evelyn. I mean, the places that this group, my iguana tribe, who are like my second family, you know, my soul family, I like to call them, experienced with me, witnessed me going through and me then. They were just things that I would never forget my whole life. And yeah, I felt in that process a repatriation with my soul, with my heart, with my body, with my being, with my authenticity and my most innate core values and qualities. It was like a rebirth, honestly. And not just that process, but from everything I've just shared with you, you know, I was being reborn, basically. And at times it was overwhelming, and it was also very beautiful. And yet still there was something in me that it felt like, yes, my energy was moving. I wasn't in that stuck place. There was more that wanted to happen. There was more that was, you know, needed here for me. And so that took me to the next step, which I can tell you about, but I realize I've shared quite a long story there, and that's around the sensuality. So if you want to hear about that, I'm willing to share.
I'm totally curious to get deeper into that. And I'm especially also curious because you mentioned, and I think that's also the experience that I am having, is that in many workplaces, I mean, sensuality as a term or word already is kind of like pointing in at least my German culture towards more like the private and like maybe even sexual settings. And there is not really a place for sensuality in everyday life and like in work, especially. And I think it's currently on a path of redefinition, because at least in my little bubble that I'm moving in, it's getting more and more redefined in a way that sensuality is actually experiencing life with all of our senses and just being fully present and like savoring little moments of just like even breathing or eating food, because it's like I feel for me a big game changer was to really um the quality that you bring into whatever you do, even if it's working, even if it's eating, the state of mind that you're in while you're doing these things really has a huge impact on, for example, how my body is able to digest the food, or, for example, how my work is received by other people, how my words are received by other people. And I think for me, it really connects to sensuality. And I'm very curious if you want to speak a little bit more to how yeah, sensuality is perceived maybe in your surrounding, and how you support people, even like, I don't know, in the corporate or in the work setting, to tap into this experience of sensuality.
Yeah. Oh, I have so much to say on this topic. So stop me at any moment.
Yes.
And the first thing I want to say is I really want to differentiate here between the sensuality and the sexuality. And it's not for me that they are not connected, because they're highly connected. But when I feel into sensuality as a word, I connect more to some of the things you were sharing with me. So For me, it's being open to receiving. It's being mindful of my experiences. It is being courageous enough to receive life and open up to life. It's being fully in my body. And as I say that, I kind of have my hands on my legs. I'm feeling connected to my physical form. And yeah, it's this feeling of totality. So I'm fully here with the whole of me in this moment, and I'm present. And I often experience my own sensuality in heightened ways when I'm out in nature, for example. Yesterday, I was going for a walk and I just stopped. I was listening to a podcast by a lady that I really love called Tara Brach. I don't know if you know her, amazing speaker. And she always touches my heart. But at a certain point, I thought, actually, I don't even need input here. So I took my earphones out and I was just in this little forest path near to the house. And again, it's another one of those moments where I started to hear this water trickling past and it was almost like my field of awareness became more expansive and inclusive. So instead of just being in my own thinking and feeling world through the podcast, I was actually opening up to my surroundings and my atmosphere in a more kind of immersed way. And that's what I mean by the totality, like I'm fully here with me, taking in that which is surrounding me. And so for me, that is a lot, what sensuality is. Yeah. And so just to say, I do a lot of work with women and sensuality and of course work around pleasure. And in particular, the word pleasure can be super triggering for people. For women as well. Like, firstly, am I allowed to have pleasure? Is it like a superficial thing? Is it frivolous, selfish? That's a big one that comes up. And is it wrong? Does that make me like if I actually go and do a program with Sam and explore my pleasure, does that mean like I'm like doing this weird thing and I shouldn't? There's a lot of like inner judgment that comes up, you know? And so yeah, I believe that, what we've done, unfortunately, in the Western world a lot is to segregate. Like pleasure happens when we're in the bedroom, when we're adults, and it stays there. And that's it. For a start, that misses out on all the other types of pleasure we have because it's not just sexual pleasure that we can experience. There's sensual pleasure, homely pleasure, playful pleasure, mental pleasure, emotional pleasure, um, relational pleasure. There's so many different forms of it. So, it's almost like we limit ourselves from having so much of a beautiful thing. And we kind of lock it away and call it a bedroom thing. And, not all of us even do that part actually. And we certainly may not talk about that. And so, a lot of my work is and has been around actually creating permission for pleasure, in our lives, creating the contact with our sensuality. Um, and that can be a very slow, delicate, personal process. And, you were asking me in the context of like business world and stuff like that. So, I have to be fully honest and say, like, right now, half of my work is in leadership coaching and leadership training. And, I don't train people on sensuality when I'm doing that kind of work. It's a very different thing. We're looking at leadership skills, we're looking at organizational based stuff. And executive coaching is not about sensuality, just to say. However, that said, I'm me, whether I'm doing a leadership training or working with an executive, and coaching them through their leadership journey, or I'm, leading my Permission for Pleasure group coaching program for women, or when I'm guiding women through their one-on-one rise into radiance, personalized retreat days. I'm actually the same person. I'm bringing the same qualities in. And so if you like, each part of those two seemingly very different halves of my life have me in them. And so get bits of both. And in the past, there has been moments where I thought, should I try to blend them together? And then I'm like, well, no, they are what they are. I need to meet each half of what I do in the way that's, most needed for that particular audience or, client. And so now it feels more like an organic thing, honestly, that I have two kind of areas of my work, and I don't make a secret of one or the other. People like go on LinkedIn and people know that I work in the field of sexuality, sacred sexuality, sexological bodywork, and tantra. So people can see that. And, similarly with my clients that I work around the topic of sensuality and sexuality and pleasure, they know that, part of my world and my life is doing leadership trainings and coachings. So, where they come together, I guess, and that was a bit your question, I think, is that I'm very body senses focused. So whilst I might not be talking about sensuality as a thing, if I'm coaching an executive, I'm not a coach that's just going to find a solution for your challenge and give you a homework and, go into a very cerebral process with you. I am an executive coach who's going to ask you to explore your topic through the body. I'm going to use embodiment. I'm going to ask you how you're experiencing what you're experiencing. We may explore through guided visualization, which is something that I love to do. And my clients too, apparently, like that process with me. So it's going to be a sensory experience wherever you are with me, because that's who I am and that's what I bring. And yeah, I don't try to hide that. I don't. I believe that our superpowers as coaches is actually bringing in everything that we are in service of, and the part around the in service of is key, because if I'm dealing with somebody who um, really needs to brainstorm about a project, then I'm going to go more into in that kind of like visioning and brainstorming place, not necessarily at that point going into deep process body work, so I think it's all around, well, who's in front of me? What are their needs? Also, what do I sense that would really serve that person from my own strong, instinctive, intuitive presence? And, bespoke guidance, really. And I use the word guidance with caution because I feel like any coaching process is definitely a co-creation. And I know from my experience that you can't have a good coaching session unless both you and the client are willing to really lean into that process. And the leaning in, of course, requires initially having some strong contracting, sharing what's important on that journey from both of our sides, and making sure that we have a robust, trusting, psychologically safe foundation from which to explore. Because if you don't have that, you can't go anywhere. So that's how they meet the worlds. And I'm these days pretty at peace with the fact that they're kind of different, but not really. And when I first started to post about my work in conscious sexuality on LinkedIn, there was a bit of a inner critic on my shoulder, like, what's people going to think? What are they going to make of me? What are they going to think my work actually is? Will I lose leadership coaching work because of that? Will I lose clients? Will people feel a bit like triggered or distanced by this? And actually, Evelyn, it's been quite the contrary most of the time. I'm sure one or two along the way have thought, okay, that's not for me. But mainly, I would say that there has come more curiosity. And I found that a lot of my client base, they've transitioned. So they came in maybe through one, avenue, and now they're exploring a different side with me. So, yeah, I feel like it's definitely a delicate path to walk, but it's absolutely possible by staying in integrity and transparency at the same time. And what I'm all about is, going back to that pleasure word, is really helping people to connect to and prioritize their pleasure in new and heightened ways. And before the word pleasure, self-love, self-acceptance, you know, self-care, awareness of self. We can only go to pleasure in any of its forms when we have again, that healthy relationship with our inner world. So, in some ways, I guess, whilst a big proportion of my work is in the conscious sexuality, I say one of the biggest directions of my work and themes of my work is around self-love. So I'm a kind of self-love coach in some ways, self-acceptance coach. So it just so happens that one of the modalities is through bodywork. And from my own personal experience, again, this has been a huge journey because before I ever went into working with this, I was on my own journey and I received tantra massages, 40 of them, over a period of several years with an amazing practitioner. And so I went through that whole client feeling of working through my themes and challenges and, everything that was coming up in me through receiving the massage. And it had such a profound effect on me, more than anything else I'd ever experienced. And I've experienced quite a lot of different modalities in my life. And so, yeah, I know how it is to receive. And I believe that's what makes my work powerful because I have been that receiver of this. I have been in that vulnerable, place of having the very first tantra massage or the very first sexological bodywork session, you know, thinking, what am I doing? Like, oh, how's this going to be? And going through some of the, again, self judgments and fears and expectations and all of that. And then finding just this immense joy and vitality. And again, I'm going to use the word expression in myself. Yeah, I mean, unlike everyone, I have my days, I have my ups and downs, and I'm a highly sensitive creature and I feel everything. So I still navigate things in my life, but I have this means of reconnecting with my energy, revitalizing myself, renewing myself, and yeah, my life force. We call that Kundalini in Tantra. We say it's located at the base of the spine, and it gets basically activated through Tantra massage, and then is used to energize and enliven us, and to be a real source. And so I know how to move that energy in me. I know how to, shift the stuckness. And I'm alive. I feel myself. And so one of my biggest joys is, working with women in particular who perhaps feel disconnected, or they have maybe gone through some really challenging physical or emotional things in their life, traumas, and they've lost that sense of their bodies. They maybe have shut their senses down a little bit to self-protect for survival purposes. Maybe they've even, felt dissatisfied or, somehow like they couldn't prioritize that side of themselves. And so I just love, accompanying them on their journey back to coming home to their sensuality and sexuality and seeing the knock-on effect. Actually, I'd rather call it the ripple effect.
Mm.
David G, he's one of my favorite meditation gurus. I love his stuff. And he talks about your sacred ripple. And I love seeing the sacred ripple return in people. And then how their relationships flourish and blossom, and how their careers start to grow and change, and how they start to, reclaim that sense of fulfillment in their lives. So all of this is because of my journey and what I went through, really, and how I know what that brought to me. It's why I'm so passionate about helping people to access a little bit of this for themselves. Yeah, it's a long story.
So beautiful what you share. And I also love this, like, how you said it, like how you were speaking to being in service and bringing like your different aspects, like, because it showed that we're way more complex, like we're such complex beings, and the clients that come to you, they're one person, but they have so many different sides. So how you're meeting them on these different levels, but ultimately really allowing each one, doesn't matter like in which area, to really tap back into this sense of self, connecting to their aliveness, and using this connection to their body, to their aliveness, to their sensuality to really create or flourish, how you said it, in the different life areas, of relationship, of career, of all the different areas that there are. So
Yeah.
yeah, that's really
Yeah, that's
beautiful.
the thing.
Mm.
Because, women are often associating their identity with giving. So if I give, then I exist. If I do something for somebody else, that makes me a valid person. And so this nurturing, which comes so naturally to many of us women, not all of us, then becomes a kind of default behavior. And we start to forget, actually, who am I when I'm not giving? Because I have an essence here. I have my needs, I have my desires, I have my wishes. And so it's not either or. It's not like either I'm a giver or I'm not. It's I can give and be generous and nurturing, and I can also offer myself that nurturing. I can also offer myself that generosity. I can hold space in my own heart for me. And I believe a big, big part of holding that space is by fully accepting that we are sentient, sexual, sensual beings, and that our expansion and our experience of ourselves in those ways is a holy, sacred thing. You know, it's not wrong, it's not shameful, it's not a nasty, horrible thing that bad girls do or want. Yeah, it's something completely natural.
Oh,
Mm.
that's such a beautiful, beautiful note to end on. Thank you so much for sharing your warm and nurturing presence with me today, of sharing so many interesting insights with our listeners. And yeah, looking forward to see what other connections might arise from this conversation. And yeah, looking forward to have you in our community.
Thanks, Evelyn. Thanks for a lovely space together. Really enjoyed.